Well, here we are again. I'm so glad that those of you who are able to be on tonight are able to be on live. If you weren't able to get on this event live, then as you know from other times, this will be live. This will be recorded on YouTube here shortly after I have a chance to just make sure that everything's the way it should be, and then I'll get it live on or recorded and up on YouTube just as soon as possible. I want to thank you for your patience in rescheduling this. We did have a bit of a hurricane that came through last week. We weren't affected here. People all around us were, but this little strip of land here where I live was quite protected. We had some rain, some wind, but no hurricane effect whatsoever. We didn't even have a flicker of power out, so that was really good. It was my first experience with a storm like that since I've been a resident here, so I was kind of glad my experience was a minor one. But I also wanted to just make a scheduling note here. I'm getting started with you a couple of minutes early just so I can let you know that I'm going to try to do some catch up on some of these Hangouts live. I will be doing another one of these on Thursday, this coming Thursday, the 8th of September at 6:30 as well. Try to get a couple of these caught up and then start doing them once a week until we get everything up on YouTube and then moving forward. I just recently, as I told you on the last, in the last email, I mentioned that my Amazon Kindle book is live. It's up on Amazon Kindle as we speak. And it's the kind of book that I can go in and I can edit, I can update it as I see new clarification and new insight. I can go in and update it and then just get a notice that it's been updated. And if you've got the book, you'll get the updated version when you look at it the next time. And so that really works out well because, you know, God is just the kind of expansive, he's always peeling back the layers of the onion of truth, and we get to see something a little bit more in depth or a little bit better clarification. And so even this week, I went in and edited a couple of chapters, and I wrote a new chapter, which I'll actually be doing that chapter this Thursday, and looking forward to that. It's actually turning out to be one of my favorites. But I really appreciate it, you getting the word out and letting people know that Unshackled Grace, or the stories we can tell, is live on Amazon Kindle. So if you have a chance to spread that word, I would really appreciate it. And let's you and I together start listening for the snap of the shackles of religion and the shackles of fear and the shackles of past experiences coming off of grace, so that grace can take its full effect in the lives of believers, no matter where they are. It doesn't matter if they're in Nigeria or South Korea or up in Alaska or right here in Florida. It doesn't matter. Grace, when it has its perfect work and when it's allowed to be fully functional in the life of the believer, is the most powerful force in the whole universe, because it's backed up by, anchored in, and established by the love of God, the love that God has for you. So I look forward to this study. I told you the title of this was going to be The Widow's Secret. And I am so excited about helping you discover the mystery of the widow's secret. So let's go ahead and get started with that now. She was shocked that she was even here in this place, alone now with two sons. Even though her husband had been under the charge of one of the most famous men in the country, he had also made some really bad choices. She discovered that her late husband had left her not only without an income, but worse, he was awful with money. Her two sons at this moment are about to be collected up by his creditors and held in slavery to pay off the debt. Now listen, if you're a mom, put yourself in this mom's place. I know I'd do anything for my kids, especially if it was something to save my kids. She has just lost their father and their breadwinner, and she's trying desperately to find her bearings as she begins this life now as a single mom. There are provisions for widows in her community that she could turn to, such as borrowing money with no collateral and no check on her ability to repay that loan. Actually, if you read the law, it says that no one can even ask her for collateral because, quote unquote, I am her collateral, says the Lord. Whoa, that's quite a statement. God is the co-signer for widows. But what she does instead of that, instead of relying on those options, what she does instead of that is our story today. So this story comes from 2 Kings chapter 4. It's a small little package of just 6 verses that offers a huge benefit and a huge impact to you and I as we get into the message of the story itself. So I want to start right at the beginning of this story. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. This widow was the wife of one of the sons of the prophets. That was his occupation. That was his full-time job. His overseer was none other than Elisha the prophet, a very well-known man of God. This little widow comes straight to Elisha to make her case for help. She reminds him that her husband was a man that feared God, and as Elisha knows very well, that would be true. But the creditors are on their way to take her 2 sons into slavery to pay for her husband's bad financial choices. So let's see if I can get this straight. He was in good standing with God, but he was terrible with money. Interesting combination. Oh, by the way, there's another provision in the law at this time for debtors. It's called Jubilee. However, Jubilee ran there's a span of 49 years in between Jubilees. And we don't know where in that span of 49 years this event occurs. So likely it wasn't an option because in Jubilee, in the provision of Jubilee, on the first day of the 50th year, the year of Jubilee, every debt was canceled. So if that had been even an option, she could have waited until Jubilee. But she doesn't do that. She goes straight to the man of God, Elisha, and makes her case. Elisha's first reaction to this widow is, what do you think I can do for you? Obviously, he's aware of her other options as well, so why is she coming to him? But he quickly switches gears and asks her an interesting question. He says, tell me what you have. She replies from her current mindset of, I have nothing. Haven't you been listening to me? I've lost everything. And I'm about to lose the only 2 things I still have. I've lost my husband. I've lost my income earner. I've lost my future income earner. And now I'm about ready to lose my sons to pay the debt that my husband incurred. Now, I have lost my husband. And I know those feelings of emptiness and how they can permeate every thought if you're not really careful. So this time, Elisha then asked her again, tell me what you have in your house. That's a better defined question. It gets her mind off of the bigness of her emptiness and her loss and focuses her on what's in her house. She can handle that. And her reply to him is, nothing. I have nothing except this little pot of oil. And I can hear a silent, and what good is that little pot in the face of all this debt? I want you to notice first that he did not tell her what she had. And also, he didn't help her get it out. He asked her to say it for herself. What do you have? Too often we wait and wait for God to tell us what we have and what we should do. Consider that maybe God is waiting on us to tell him what we have. You're going to see the significance of this very shortly. Now, the next 4 verses in this passage are a single thought, so I'm going to go through them line by line. So buckle your seatbelt because this is going to get interesting. Next, Elijah says to her, quote, "Go to your neighbors abroad and borrow vessels." Okay, we got to just break this down a little bit. So this word vessels can be any size container, any condition, any material, any apparatus of any kind that will hold something, anything. So when he says go abroad to neighbors, borrow vessels, he says any condition, any material, any apparatus that will hold anything. So go abroad and borrow vessels. And the word abroad, it means to go over the back fence, across town, down the highway, next door, out in the field, to anyone you can get to. Borrow vessels of any kind. And here's one of the most important lines in this whole little passage. And he says to her, borrow not a few. Don't put any limits on this. Don't restrict anyone. Don't edit out any neighbor. Don't refuse any vessel. Borrow not a few. I want you to just remember that we go through life with internal definitions and limitations. We come to life situations with those internal definitions already in place, and sometimes we don't realize the effect that they have. Elisha is instructing this little widow to knock down the boundaries that her experience, her fears, her family, and her culture have placed on her future, and to borrow not a few vessels. Don't limit who you borrow from. Don't limit who you expect to receive from. That's one of those pause and think a minute. Okay, so far we have a lady who is in distress. 2 of the worst kinds of distress you could experience. The loss of a spouse and debt so high that you're going to lose your kids in repayment. But she doesn't take the normal course of action that would be available to her in her culture. She doesn't take out a loan, borrowing with God as her co-signer, and she doesn't go to her community for help, both of which she could have done. Or there actually was another third possibility, was if her husband had a brother, and one of his brothers would take responsibility for her care. We don't even know if he had brothers, but it really doesn't matter because she doesn't even go there. She comes instead straight to the man of God, since her husband was in his charge, and he tells her to go get an unlimited number of containers of any kind. I want you to please notice that he was not advising her to get just enough. Oh my. I do have to wonder sometimes where this curse of just enough came from, and where this living in poverty got such a foothold, and how it is that just over broke living crept into the way believers think. I think by the time we're finished tonight, you'll agree that it's in stark contrast to the way God thinks and the way he treats those that he cares for. And this little widow proves this truth again and again. Elisha then further tells her that when she has the vessels, to bring them into the house with her and her sons and close the door behind them. So there'll be no distractions, no nosy neighbors. He tells her specifically to fill each vessel full and then to set it off to the side. We just have to stop here and consider, why would Elisha tell her to fill them and then lift the vessel and move each full vessel off to the side? You just wait. The story is going to tell you why this action is so critically important. So she does it. She gets the containers, she goes into the house with her son, she closes the door behind them, and then she starts filling. Each container, she fills it And then she lifts it and she sets it off to the side. She fills and lifts one. She fills and lifts two. And then 3, and then 7, and 11, and more until they are all full. They're all full. They've been lifted and moved to the side. And when it's done, she turns to her sons and she says, listen to this, she says, more. Give me more. Oh my gosh. Did you notice what has changed inside this woman? She has gone from a mindset of empty, I have nothing, I am below zero, to I want more. What on earth has happened? Fullness happened to her. Fullness has that effect on you. Once you become familiar with fullness, you want more of it. Each time she lifted a full pot, she felt its fullness until fullness got into every cell, until fullness got into the way she thinks, got into the way that she expected. So that when she needed more, she did not even hesitate to ask for more. She didn't look at the full vessels and say, oh wow, we have enough. No, she instinctively instead says, more, give me more. Can you see how fullness begets fullness? Can you see how fullness creates the desire for more fullness? So flip that around and you'll start to understand why it is that lack begets more lack. Embrace lack, and lack becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy in your life. Fullness does that too. So the way to break the cycle of lack is fullness. This could not be more clear than in this story. Her lack was her first response when asked what she had. I have nothing, she said. And if Elisha had focused on her lack, lack would have also been her future. But he didn't. He did not ask her, by the way, what she needed, identifying what she lacked. But instead, he insisted that she tell him what she had. Oh my gosh, I hope you can see this. He didn't focus on what she needed, he focused on what she had. Next, her two sons told her, there are no more vessels. And when they said that to her, there are no more vessels, the scripture says, and the oil stayed. That word stayed doesn't mean it stopped, as if she only had just enough to fill those vessels for the problem at hand. But it says the oil stayed. It remained still available. Get this, it had filled all those vessels without diminishing. She was told not to edit any neighbor, not to edit or limit any material, or to limit any quantity, but to knock the boundaries and restrictions off of her sources. And yet what she had when she began was able to fill all those vessels, plus remain undiminished, ready to fill more. Then she went to tell Elisha that she had done what he had told her to do. And then he gave her her next steps. I want you to notice that he didn't tell her everything up front and then go off on his way to do more important things. He told her the first things to do. And then when fullness had worked its way into her expectation, he added the next steps. And here's the next step. Go, sell the oil, and pay your debt. I want you to notice that he did not give her a pass on the debt. No, he gave her a solution to the debt. Elisha says something that I hope you will never, ever forget. He says it this way, quote, sell the oil, pay your debt, and then It's that word then. I want you to pay really close attention to this. Sell the oil, pay your debt, and then you and your sons live. That word live means to abound, to be nourished, to flourish. Then you and your sons live, abound, and flourish of the rest. That little word of is a word of origin. Your abounding, your nourishing, your flourishing will come of this little pot of oil continually, non-diminishing. I want you to think for a moment as a parent. Would you prefer your kids were needy, and because of their neediness, they were always coming to you asking for help? Or would you love to see your kids flourish? Is their neediness something you delight in so that they'll come to you for help? I don't think so. Well, then why do so many believers think God likes us needy? As in, our neediness keeps us somehow connected better to Him. Why do we think His delight is in our lack? It just isn't true. He is ready to answer you like He did this little widow woman, with more than the solution to her acute need. She had an acute need. Trust me, that is an acute need. The kids are not ready to be taken into slavery to pay a debt. That's a big deal. But when she asked for the solution to that problem, for help with that problem, the answer that came to her was not just a solution for that acute problem. She didn't come to Elisha asking for a solution to her ongoing income. That wasn't even on her mind. This mom came to him to save her sons. That's it. That's all that was on her mind that day. That's all that she could see at that time. But the truth was, she had a much bigger problem that she wasn't even asking about. Her acute need was saving her sons from slavery. Her chronic or ongoing need was a source of income. And she hadn't even thought about that yet. But this answer that God gives Elisha for her is such a God kind of answer. The answer is the solution to the debt plus the source of their ongoing wealth. I hope you can see how huge this is. Exceeding abundantly above what she could ask or think. This is the God way of answering an acute and chronic problem. His answer is create wealth. I just think that's just so amazing. Let me sum it up this way. This little lesson, I'm going to sum it up in a single line. Here's what God says. Tell me what you have, and I'll show you how to create wealth with it. Let me say that again. Tell me what you have, and I'll show you how to create wealth with it. Now you have it. You know the widow's secret. The widow's secret is step out of your fear of your own shadow. Tell me what you have, and I'll show you how to resolve your critical problem of debt, plus how to solve your chronic problem of poverty. Now, there's something that we need to notice here. She didn't create a single pot. She didn't create the oil. She didn't even come up with the grand idea on how to do this. And yet her outcome is a perfect picture of the benefits of being Abraham's daughter. You see, as a part of Abraham's family, she had every right to expect to, and I'm going to quote here, she had every right to expect to drink from wells she did not dig, to live in houses she did not build, to eat from vineyards she did not plant. And the truth is, she hadn't planted a single tree. She hadn't pruned them. She hadn't watered them. She hadn't harvested the olives. She hadn't pressed the oil. She hadn't prepared that oil for market. She had not gathered the materials for and produced the vessels of every kind that she had collected. And she hadn't sweated and toiled over creative ideas. None of it. However, this little widow did know one thing for sure. What she knew for sure was that she had absolutely no ability to change her own state or to improve her own situation. She knew that. I want to interject here that this widow's experience is actually a perfect working definition of a line. You'll recognize this, of a line in the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospels where Jesus says, quote unquote, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Where that passage is, that word poor means to be unable to change one's own state or status in life. Like a beggar who is born into a caste system cannot by his own effort or his own ideas change his class. This widow had no hope of changing her own state by her own ideas, by her own means, or by her own efforts. So she turned to the only source who she knew could help her, even though she had no idea on earth how it would happen. It's very interesting if you think about it, that this experience of the little pot that keeps filling the vessels, and she fills, she lifts, and she moves off to the side, and that fullness changes her. That sense, that comfortableness, that getting used to the feeling of fullness instead of getting used to and living with the feeling of lack, as if there's something to be glorified about that. There's no glory in lack, I'm sorry. But I want you to see that this experience of this pot of oil, she called it little, so we'll say little. We won't do little, we'll do little. This little pot of oil has filled all of these vessels that she borrowed, not a few, every kind of size, every kind of container, every kind of material container. It didn't matter whether it was a flask or a pot or a vase or a sack. It didn't matter as long as it would hold a substance of any kind. And this little pot has filled. And yet this pot of oil has not diminished its state. It remained available. Well, her experience with this little pot and its creation of fullness has moved this little widow into a class of wealth that's normally enjoyed only by the super wealthy. Here's how you define that. This is the definition of super wealthy. You want it? You ready? She has wealth that continues even though she didn't create, generate, construct, or manufacture anything. Her wealth is ongoing and yet non-diminishing. It never diminishes. And except for the energy that it takes for her to pour some oil into a pot or into a vessel and sell it, this wealth actually doesn't even require her labor. I can tell you, I know of multi-billion-dollar-a-year industries that sell residual income as a dream to achieve. The definition of residual income is that it's an income that once you build it, it continues to produce income even after you stop working on it. Well, I gotta tell you, this little widow woman has one up on them. She never built anything. And yet it produces a life of flourishing, nourishing for her and her sons. Does it sound just slightly familiar to you? It does to me. Here's how it goes. Consider the lilies and sparrows. They don't build, they don't sweat, they don't sow, they don't reap, but they enjoy harvest. And so extravagant is their harvest that even Solomon, in all his glory, would be pea-green with envy. My words. You know, to understand this term, in all his glory, it's like somebody is throwing open wide the doors of his palace to let you and I gaze in at his true wealth, the art, the gold, the precious stones, the magnitude of his wealth that people from all over the world came to see. And yet God says, Jesus says, sparrows and lilies who don't toil, don't sweat, don't build anything, don't harvest, don't sow, don't reap, but yet they participate, they get to harvest. And their harvest is of such extravagance that Solomon, in all his glory, can't compare. And then he says, O ye of little faith. Little faith being connected directly to the idea or the belief that you need to sow, you need to create, you need to manufacture something in order to harvest. And Jesus just looks you and I kind of right eye to eye, soul to soul, and says, aren't you much better than these? Oh, ye of little faith? Well, this little widow woman, she certainly has proven that to be true. She has a source for continued nourishing, abounding, and flourishing. And it continues to benefit her and her sons without diminishing its supply. Snap, snap. You were not meant to sweat and toil and fret in order to flourish. Snap, snap. You know, my own experiences after my husband passed away was scary. Not quite this scary. But I felt empty and I felt very alone, even though, in all honesty, I was never alone. I was surrounded by friends or family for quite a period of time. But on the inside, I barely knew who Jeannie was without Biff, because we had been married for 36 years. But I can tell you that I've learned since then to be very comfortable and at rest, even when I don't know, is my only answer. I told a couple of my friends, you know you've arrived at something. I'm not sure exactly what you call it when I don't know is an okay answer. I don't know. But I'm very comfortable with that. Not in a flippant way, but in a very restful way. I don't know. You know, there were many nights I would fall off to sleep saying, God, I don't know how, but I thank you for loving me. Or, God, I don't know why, but I thank you for keeping me. And I thank you that I'm not required to be the all-knowing one. That's your job. I just know that I know the all-knowing one. And I'm okay with that. So I took this widow's story to heart myself, and I continue to practice it myself today. You see, I knew I had two things for sure. One was going to be the proceeds from our home once it was sold. And I asked God to show me how best to invest that. There were lots of a variety of ways that I could have invested that. I chose to put it into the building of this house. And then the second thing was I knew I had the gift of teaching. I had known that and used it for many years. My dad had told me that I was a teacher since I was about 15 years old. I didn't believe him. And I tried to do anything else instead. But it seemed like no matter where I worked, I always ended up training other people. And then in my late 20s, that began to include teaching Bible classes and then later on counseling. So that gift of teaching I knew was there. I knew I had it. So when the question was posed to me by God, tell me what you have, Jeannie Cooper, I knew for sure at that time, I knew I had two things that I was sure of. One was the proceeds from the house that my husband and I built and I sold. And I knew I had the gift to teach. But I didn't know what to do with it. So I knew that the teaching was one thing I had for sure, but I had no idea what to do with it going forward. You see, over the years, several people, a number of people, my son being one of them, had suggested to me for years that I write a book. But every time I sat down and tried, it just went nowhere. I'm a teacher. I'm a speaker. I'm not a writer. And then more recently, actually since I moved here, at the urging and the very gentle guidance of one of my nieces, I began writing this book that is now available, as I told you, through Amazon Kindle. And it finally went live in August. Finally. I mean, you have no idea the accomplishment that feels like to me. Because even though I know this book isn't a grand example of literary excellence, what I do know is that it's the truth, and that it comes from a heart that has been unshackled by the grace of God. So let me share with you very quickly what happened when my nieces came for a beach weekend. As I was thinking about them coming, I didn't anticipate their visit wondering if they were going to be pieces of my future puzzle. Nope. I just wanted to spend time with them, walk the beach with them, pick up shells, and maybe have some seafood. But it was during that weekend that one of them suggested I do a podcast and a YouTube. And I looked right at my niece and said, I have no idea what a podcast is. And I have no idea how to do a YouTube. But I knew instinctively, almost immediately, that this conversation was a piece of my puzzle. Since then, the pieces are coming together and starting to take shape. Now, truth be known, I still go to sleep some nights saying, God, I don't know. I hope you're getting all this. Because you're the all-knowing one, not me. I still see myself as that little lady who can't change her state. I didn't volunteer for this, but I found myself here and discovered that God is very present here. And that when he asks, tell me what you have, Jeannie Cooper, and I'll teach you how to create wealth with it. Well, my version of that is still in the development process. I'm still working on it. I'm working on, new chapters of the book. I'm actually just this past weekend got the inspiration for another book, and I will get started working on the framework for that as well. But I can report to you that first piece, that first part where God said, tell me what you have, the proceeds from our home, it already has become a source of increased worth in this new home that I used to build this house. And it happened even before I moved in. So you can imagine that, of course, I expect nothing less from the other pieces. I want to conclude this story with another scripture that I believe fits really well with this widow's story. And it might take a little bit of time to get used to thinking this way, but trust me, it develops quickly if you let it. It's in Proverbs 16, verse 9. And it says this: a man's heart devises, plans, plots, sets the purpose and the course of his way, his path, his journey, his course of life. I want to read that again. Proverbs 16, verse 9 says this: a man's heart devises that means to plan, to plot, to set the purpose and the course of his path, his journey, his way, the course of his life. But the Lord directs. That word directs means fixes and establishes his steps, the cadence. I don't know if you know what a cadence is, but it's like a rhythm. When there's a marching, there's a cadence to marches. So if I were to read this to you again, did you get that? Let me say it to you my way. The desires of your heart set the course of your life. And God then goes into action to establish it, to set it in place, and to set the rhythm for it to happen. Most believers sit and really anxiously wait for God to tell them what they desire. And it simply doesn't work that way. I know that many people have been taught to distrust their own heart. A lot of times that happens using verses like, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Please, newsflash. The first casualty of Calvary was that stony, deceptive heart. Calvary exchanged that heart for a heart of flesh, one that's touchable and teachable. I want you to notice that verse about the deceitful heart is inside the parentheses. So it doesn't even apply to new covenant believers. If you're still living inside the parentheses, it fits. But once you're no longer under the law, it doesn't apply anymore. There's also another verse that tells us that God wants to give us the desires of our heart. I'm going to challenge you. Brush off the cobwebs of your heart. Take a risk with God. Tell him what you desire. And then watch him start to weave an amazing tapestry into its fulfillment. Truth is, if you never share your desire with him, you'll never know that what I'm telling you is true, will you? So I'm going to challenge you, try it. If no other reason, try it just to prove me wrong. But I'm here to tell you it's true. When was the last time you shared with God what your desire is, and then trusted him to establish and frame the timing, the rhythm, and the fulfillment of it? Most of the time, your heart's desire is actually connected directly to what you have. So it fits very well with the story of this little widow. But it won't happen at all if you never tell him what you have and what you desire. So I say tell him. And by doing that, you will be taking a giant pair of snippers to the shackles restricting grace in your life. Snap, snap. The challenge is, will you do it? Will you tell God what you have and then trust him to weave a masterful fulfillment of it? Snap, snap. Now you know the widow's secret. Here it is one more time. Tell me what you have, and I'll teach you how to create wealth with it. Now you know the widow's secret. I hope you love it. I hope you can't wait to get really quiet in your own quietness with the Lord yourself. Brush off the cobwebs of the desire of your heart and then put it out there. You can trust him. God is a safe place. God is a safe place for you to dream again. He really is. I challenge you to do it. And if you can't do it for any other reason, do it just to prove me wrong. I can hardly wait, because I know I'm not wrong. Have a great night. Those of you who can, I'll see you Thursday night for a new story, brand new story. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight.